The rain in Seattle didn't just fall, it hunted. It drove itself into the cracked asphalt of Pier 44 like a barrage of cold, liquid bullets, washing away the grime of the city but leaving the shadows untouched. Captain Maya Hayes stood in the narrow alleyway between two abandoned shipping containers. Letting the freezing downpour soak through her black tactical jacket, she didn't shiver. Her body had forgotten how to feel the cold a long time ago. Or perhaps, the chill inside her was simply far worse than anything the weather could conjure. In her right hand, the steel of her suppressed Sig Sauer P226 felt heavier than usual. It was a familiar weight, an extension of her own arm. But tonight, the gravity of what she was about to do made the weapon feel like an anvil. Hesitation is a luxury, Maya, and in our line of work, luxury gets you killed. The voice echoed in her mind, clear and commanding, cutting through the deafening roar of the storm. It was a ghost's voice, the voice of Elias Thorne. 3 years ago, Elias had been a legend within the Defense Intelligence Agency. He was the ghost who walked through walls, the phantom who broke enemy lines without leaving a footprint. More importantly, he had been her instructor at Camp Perry, the grueling Black Ops training facility known simply as the Farm. When Maya had arrived there, she was 22, broken by the loss of her family, practically drowning in her own grief. Elias hadn't offered her a life preserver. He had taught her how to breathe underwater. He had broken her down, piece by piece, only to forge her into the deadliest operative in the division. He was her mentor, her commander, the closest thing she had to a father. And now, he was her target. Elias had gone rogue 18 months ago. He hadn't just defected, he had sold the identities of a dozen deep-cover operatives to a global syndicate. Watching from the shadows as Maya's friends and colleagues were systematically hunted down. The man who taught her the value of loyalty had become the ultimate traitor. Now, he was the world's highest-paid mercenary, a ghost operating on his own chilling terms. Maya took a slow, deliberate breath, the scent of rust, salt, and decaying fish filling her lungs. The mission briefing from JSOC was explicitly clear: find Thorne. Eliminate him. No capture. No interrogation. He knows too much to be put in a cage. She thumbed the safety off her weapon. I'm coming for you, Elias. Maya slipped out of the alley, her boots making absolutely no sound against the slick, rain-swept concrete. She moved with a fluid, lethal grace, a technique Elias himself had spent months drilling into her. Heel to toe, roll the weight, keep your center of gravity low. It was a twisted irony that she was using his own teachings to hunt him. Ahead of her loomed Warehouse 9, a hulking, rusted monolith sitting at the very edge of the pier. Intel suggested Elias was using it as a temporary safe house before securing a boat out of the country. The massive steel doors were chained shut from the outside, but Maya's eyes tracked upward to a broken skylight on the second-story roof. Scaling the rusted fire escape, Maya felt the familiar surge of adrenaline. Her heart rate remained a steady 60 beats per minute. Total control. She reached the roof, the wind howling furiously, threatening to tear her off the edge. Peering through the jagged glass of the skylight, she scanned the interior, pitch black. She attached a rappel line to a sturdy steel beam, hooked her carabiner, and silently dropped through the opening. She landed on the catwalk with a muted thud. The darkness inside was suffocating, smelling of damp wood and old engine oil. Maya lowered her night vision goggles over her eyes. The world instantly snapped into a glowing, eerie emerald green. She began her descent down the iron stairs, sweeping her weapon in tight, controlled arcs. Every corner, every shadow was a potential kill zone. Elias was a master of asymmetrical warfare. If he was here, he wouldn't just be waiting, he would be waiting with a trap. If you walk into a room and it feels too quiet, Maya, it's because the devil is holding his breath. His words drifted into her memory again, an unwanted whisper. Maya paused at the bottom of the stairs. It was too quiet. She moved through the labyrinth of stacked wooden crates and rusted machinery. Her senses dialed up to their absolute limits. Suddenly, her boot hovered a fraction of an inch over the concrete floor. She froze. Her eyes caught a faint, almost invisible glint stretching across the aisle at ankle height. A tripwire, high-tensile monofilament, invisible to the naked eye. Even in daylight, she traced the wire to its source, a block of C4 explosives packed tightly against a load-bearing pillar. If she had taken one more step, the entire warehouse would have come down on top of her. A lump formed in her throat, not from fear, but from the agonizing realization of intimacy. The placement of the wire, the knot used to secure it, the specific choice of explosive, it was Elias's signature. He wasn't just here, he was expecting her. Carefully, agonizingly slowly, Maya stepped over the wire. She reached the center of the warehouse. In the middle of an empty clearing sat a single, solitary object, a wooden chair, and resting on the seat of the chair was a small, glowing object. A burner phone. Maya approached it, her gun raised, checking every conceivable angle. The warehouse remained dead silent. She reached out and picked up the phone. The screen was illuminated, displaying a single, paused audio file. Her finger hovered over the play button. Her hands, which hadn't trembled when she defused a dirty bomb in Chechnya, were suddenly shaking. She swallowed hard, stealing her emotions, and pressed play. Static crackled from the tiny speaker, followed by a sound that made Maya's blood turn to ice. It was a soft, rumbling chuckle. "You stepped over the wire with your left foot, didn't you, Echo?" Maya's breath hitched. Echo. It was her call sign, the name he had given her. "Your stride always was a little uneven when it rained." Elias's voice continued, smooth, deeply resonant, and heartbreakingly familiar. "I taught you to account for the slip. But you always favored your right side. It's okay, Maya. Nobody is perfect." Maya spun around, her gun aimed into the dark abyss of the warehouse. Her heart suddenly pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. "Elias," she shouted, her voice echoing off the high tin ceiling. The recording continued, oblivious to her cry. "If you're listening to this, it means JSOC finally sent my best student to put me down. I'm flattered, honestly. But you and I both know you're not here just for the mission. Maya, you're here because your heart is broken. You're here for answers." Tears pricked the corners of Maya's eyes, mixing with the rain dripping from her hair. She gritted her teeth, desperately trying to force the emotion back down into the dark box where she kept her trauma. "The ghost who feels, dies. They told you I betrayed our country." Elias's voice dropped an octave, losing its playful edge, turning dangerously serious. "They told you I sold out our brothers and sisters in Vienna. But you know me, Maya. You know my soul better than anyone. Ask yourself, why would a man who spent his entire life hunting monsters suddenly become one?" The audio file hissed with static. "The agency you're bleeding for. The people holding your leash right now. They're the ones who pulled the trigger in Vienna. I'm just the man who found out. And now, they've sent you to silence me." Maya's hand tightened around her pistol. Her mind spun wildly. "Lies. It's a psychological tactic. He's trying to get into my head. I'm not in Seattle, kid." The recording finished, but the game has officially begun. "You want the truth? Come and find me. But be careful, Echo. Once you see the dark, you can never go back to the light." The phone beeped once. Then the screen went completely black. Silence rushed back into the warehouse, heavier and more suffocating than before. Maya stood alone in the dark, the burner phone clutched in her hand. The cold detachment she had relied on for years was cracking, giving way to a terrifying, chaotic storm of doubt, anger, and a desperate, lingering hope. She looked down at her weapon, then up toward the skylight where the rain continued to pour. Elias Thorne had taught her how to survive everything except him. Maya crushed the burner phone beneath her boot, turning the plastic and glass to dust. She keyed her radio, speaking to the JSOC handler listening miles away. "Command, this is Echo," she said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper. "Target is not at the location, but the hunt is on, and I won't stop until I put a bullet in his chest." She released the radio button. She was going to find him. She was going to look him in the eye and uncover the truth, even if it meant tearing down the entire world to do it. Berlin, Germany. 3 days later. The rain that had stalked Captain Maya Hayes in Seattle had morphed into a freezing, unrelenting sleet by the time she arrived in Berlin. The city was a different beast entirely, a labyrinth of concrete monoliths and Cold War ghosts. Still breathing a chill that seemed to seep into her very bones. She stood by the narrow window of a cramped, low-rent hotel room in Prenzlauer Berg, a district that had once been on the wrong side of the wall. Looking out, the Berlin night was a smear of grim illumination. Dim lights from Soviet-era apartment blocks struggled against the falling snow. And faded neon signs from businesses below, SPIELHALLE, and Stern Café. Hat Len Nung Vet Mao Sun Du Yu Ot Tren Con Duong Hep. They'll turn the world against you. But they can't turn me. Elias Thorne's final words from the Seattle recording played on a loop in her mind. Her hand, resting on the cold glass, still trembled slightly. She wasn't in Seattle anymore. But she was more isolated than ever before. Her handler at JSOC had cut communication after she reported failing to eliminate the target. She was a rogue operative now. A phantom, hunting a legend. On the rickety wooden desk beside her lay a small burner phone. Currently black, and a piece of crumpled paper. Written on the paper in her hand. A frantic translation from the audio file, The Iron Curtain's Shadow. Block 9. It was a Morse code message Elias had embedded in his final chuckle. A classic Elias maneuver. Hiding critical intel in plain sight. Using a technique only she would recognize. It directed her here, to a former Stasi safehouse Elias had used in the late 90s. Located in a rundown complex just a few blocks away. Maya let out a long, slow breath, her gaze focusing on the Morse notes. The image of Elias Thorne, the mentor, the father figure, the man who had broken her down and rebuilt her into a lethal weapon, was splitting. Cracking like the window glass against the sleet. Was he a traitor who had sold out their people in Vienna? Or was he a victim of a deep state conspiracy? As the recording claimed, Vance sends his regards. The name hung over her like a guillotine. GM Doc Tin Bao Vance. Her commander. The uncertainty was a physical weight. She closed her eyes for a moment, remembering a crisp autumn afternoon at Camp Perry. Elias had been teaching her counter-surveillance. Trust is a weakness. Maya. Direct information is a variable. Trust is a vulnerability. In the dark, only the variables matter. He had been talking about espionage. But now, it felt like he had been talking about himself. She snapped her eyes open. The decision made. She was going to that safe house. She needed the variables. Maya left the room, pulling her tactical jacket tighter. She moved through the Berlin streets like a ghost, blending into the shadows, utilizing counter-surveillance routines she hadn't needed to employ in years. Favored her right side. Elias's words about her uneven stride echoed. I won't make that mistake again. The safe house complex, Block 9, was a colossal structure of gray concrete. Its windows dark and staring like empty eye sockets. Maya entered through a subterranean garage, her boots making absolutely no sound. The air here was heavy, smelling of damp wood, old oil, and the faint, unmistakable aroma of fear. She ascended the stairs, her suppressed Sig Sauer P-226 raised, sweeping every corner. The complex was desolate, abandoned for years. She reached the third floor and located apartment 304. The lock was a sophisticated mechanical and electronic hybrid, Elias's vintage preference. It was designed to keep people out. But it was also a lock Elias had spent weeks teaching her to defeat with a bobby pin and a 9-volt battery. She worked quickly, her hands steady, the muscle memory returning with comforting familiarity. The electronic mechanism clicked open. The mechanical lock groaned. Maya slipped inside. The apartment was minimalist, preserved in time. A single chair, a desk, a cot. Mui Elias was everywhere. The subtle scent of old books and light. Volatile gun oil. She crossed to the center of the room, her eyes adjusting to the absolute darkness. Beneath a loose floorboard near the radiator, she found a metal lockbox. Her heartbeat accelerated as she lifted it. Inside was a minimal array of contents, an outdated Austrian map of Vienna, an encoded ledger, and a small stack of identification papers for the deep-cover operatives murdered in Vienna 3 years ago. Maya ran her finger over the list. Every name but hers. And attached to the ledger was another handwritten note. This time a direct message. Echo. They aren't who they seem. Look at Vance. The confirmation struck her like a physical blow. Vance. The name from JSOC. The man who ordered her to find Thorne. Was Elias telling the truth? Suddenly, the familiar, controlled atmosphere fractured, her intuition, refined by Elias himself, screaming a warning. If you walk into a room and it feels too quiet, Maya, it's because the devil is holding his breath. Maya didn't think, she reacted. She shoved the lockbox into her satchel and dove behind an old metal desk. The apartment door exploded. A flashbang detonated, filling the room with blinding light and deafening thunder. Maya rolled, drawing her weapon, through the smoke and confusion. Two figures in black tactical gear breached the room. They weren't mercenaries. They moved with the surgical, synchronized precision of a JSOC cleaners unit. Vance hadn't sent her to eliminate Elias. Vance had sent her to find him. And then Vance sent his own people to eliminate her. She was a loose end. A variable that needed to be erased. The fight was immediate, fast, and brutal. The first cleaner fired a burst of 5mm rounds that shredded the radiator. Maya returned fire, her suppressor making the sound a soft, lethal thud. The round struck the man in his center of gravity, taking him down. The second cleaner was already on her. He discarded his primary weapon and drew a ceramic blade. Close quarters battle. Elias's favorite. He was larger than her, stronger, and he attacked with a ferocity born of relentless training. Maya met him, using the metal desk as cover and then as a weapon. She deflected a savage swipe of the knife. Her training taking over, she recognized his technique. It was derived from Elias's farm curriculum. He was using their moves against her. Size is an advantage only if they can touch you. Maya, speed is the variable that kills. Maya ducked under a roundhouse kick, grabbing the man's leg and using his own momentum to twist his balance. He slammed onto the floor with a muted thud. He was fast, though, rolling to his feet and coming at her again. They traded blows, a dance of violence and survival. The cleaner was trying to corral her against the wall. He managed a deep graze on her shoulder. The burn of the wound barely registered through the adrenaline. Maya saw her opening. She used the edge of the desk to block another knife thrust and delivered a precise, open palm strike to his throat. The man sputtered, dropping the blade. Maya stepped in, delivering a finishing strike to the side of his neck with lethal force. He crumpled next to his partner. Silence rushed back into the room, heavier and more suffocating than before. Maya stood over them, chest heaving, her Sig Sauer trained on their lifeless forms. Vance's men, her own people. The reality of her situation crystallized. The country she served had betrayed her. The agency she bled for was trying to silence her. She was truly alone. Elias's final chuckle from the Seattle recording replayed. A different interpretation now. It wasn't just a threat. It was a warning, a grim prediction. I taught you to survive everything. Everything except him. Maya turned and looked out the window again. The Berlin night was still there. But it was no longer a smear of grim illumination. It was the only light she had. She retrieved her satchel. She was going to find him. She was going to Vienna. She was going to expose Vance. The hunt was off. The war had officially begun. Elias Thorne had forged her. But he had also warned her. In this new game, trust was dead. Only variables mattered. And she was going to become the deadliest variable they had ever seen. Vienna was a city that wore its history like a heavy velvet cloak. But to Captain Maya Hayes, the grand architecture and snow-dusted cobblestones were nothing more than a graveyard. 3 years ago, this city had been the stage for Operation Blackout. It was supposed to be a standard extraction. Instead, it became a slaughterhouse. 6 deep-cover operatives, her friends, her brothers and sisters in arms, were wiped out in a single night. The official JSOC briefing stated they were ambushed by a Chechen mercenary syndicate. Elias Thorne was the tactical commander who supposedly sold their positions. But as Maya stood in the freezing shadows across from the Europol data annex, the official narrative tasted like ash in her mouth. To find the truth, she couldn't rely on the cloud. Vance's cyber division would flag her digital footprint in seconds. She needed the hard files. The raw, classified autopsy and ballistics reports locked away in Europol's offline physical servers. Digital lies. Maya. Elias's voice echoed in her memory. A constant, haunting companion. But blood and steel? They always tell the truth. Getting inside was a puzzle of patience and precision. Maya bypassed the exterior camera grid using a localized frequency jammer and slipped through a ventilation shaft meant for the building's industrial heating unit. She dropped into the basement archives with the silence of a falling snowflake. The server room was a mausoleum of blinking blue lights and humming cooling fans. Maya connected her decryption drive to the central terminal. The screen cast a pale, ghostly glow across her face as she typed in the clearance codes she had stolen from the Berlin safehouse. Access granted. She pulled up the files for Operation Blackout. Her breath hitched. There they were. Crime scene photos. Autopsy reports. She clicked on the file for Agent Marcus Vance, no relation to the director, but a kid from Texas who used to make her laugh during Hell Week at the farm. Marcus had taken 3 rounds to the chest. Maya's eyes scanned the coroner's ballistics summary. She zoomed in on the high-resolution images of the recovered slugs. Her heart, heavily trained to remain steady under fire, suddenly skipped a beat. The rifling marks, the caliber. 5.56 by 45 mm NATO. Match-grade hollow points. She pulled up the other files. Sarah, David, Elena, all of them. They weren't killed by the cheap, mass-produced 7.62 mm Kalashnikov rounds favored by the Chechen syndicate. They were killed by highly specialized, suppressed weapons. Weapons issued exclusively to JSOC Tier 1 cleaners. A cold wave of nausea washed over her. Elias hadn't betrayed them. He had discovered that their own government was assassinating its operatives. And he had been framed for it. Vance wasn't just a corrupt bureaucrat, he was a butcher. Suddenly, the hum of the cooling fans was interrupted by a sharp, electronic chirp. The terminal screen flashed red. External override. Lockdown initiated. Vance's people hadn't just been tracking her, they had laid a digital tripwire in the archive files. The heavy steel doors of the server room slammed shut with a definitive clang. Magnetic locks engaging. Maya didn't panic. Panic was a luxury. She drew her Sig Sauer and shot the control panel for the magnetic lock. Shattering the circuitry, she kicked the door open just as the heavy thud of tactical boots echoed down the concrete hallway. Target is in the basement. Weapons free, a voice barked in English. She sprinted toward the loading dock exit. 3 men in black tactical gear rounded the corner, raising their suppressed submachine guns. Maya slid across the polished concrete floor, firing twice. 2 rounds. Center mass. The lead shooter dropped. She scrambled behind a forklift as a hail of bullets chewed through the plaster wall where she had just been standing. She needed mobility. Now. Bursting through the emergency exit, Maya was hit by the biting Austrian winter. The loading dock opened up to a narrow backstreet. Idling near the dumpsters was a sleek, black Audi 6 rupees, likely the vehicle the cleaners had arrived in. The driver was stepping out, drawing his sidearm. Maya didn't break stride. She fired a single shot, hitting him in the shoulder, and vaulted over the hood of the car as he went down. She ripped the door open, threw herself into the driver's seat, and slammed the car into gear. The Audi roared to life, its V8 engine violently tearing through the quiet Vienna night. As she tore out of the alley, 2 black SUVs aggressively turned the corner, their high beams blinding her through the rearview mirror. The chase was on. Maya navigated the narrow, snow-slicked cobblestone streets of the inner Stadt with lethal precision. The Audi fishtail-ed around corners, tires screaming for grip on the ice. Behind her, the SUVs were relentless, their passengers leaning out the windows and firing controlled bursts. The rear windshield of the Audi shattered into a million glittering diamonds. Wind and snow whipped into the cabin. When you're outgunned and outrun, Maya, you don't play their game. Elias's voice cut through the chaos in her mind. It was a memory from a defensive driving course on a frozen lake in Virginia. You change the physics of the board. You embrace the slide. Ahead of her, the street fed into a wide, circular plaza surrounding a massive, stone fountain. It was a dead end for a high-speed pursuit. The roads branching off were too narrow for the SUVs. They were herding her into a kill zone. Maya glanced at the rearview mirror. The lead SUV was right on her bumper, preparing to pit maneuver her and spin her out. She gripped the steering wheel tight. Change the physics. Instead of braking for the turn, Maya slammed her foot on the accelerator. The Audi surged forward toward the stone fountain at 80 miles an hour. At the last possible second, she ripped the emergency brake and violently yanked the steering wheel to the left. The heavy car broke traction completely. It spun into a massive, uncontrolled sideways drift on the ice. The maneuver was suicidal. But it wasn't uncontrolled. Maya Feather tapped the gas, using the momentum to swing the heavy rear end of the Audi violently around. The lead SUV, expecting her to brake, had no time to react. The rear of Maya's spinning Audi slammed like a sledgehammer into the front axle of the pursuing SUV. The impact was deafening. The physics of the crash launched the heavy SUV into the air, flipping it onto its roof before it crashed spectacularly into the frozen fountain in a shower of stone and sparks. The second SUV slammed on its brakes, swerving to avoid the wreckage and crashing head-on into a lamppost. Maya didn't wait to see if they survived. The Audi was totaled, the engine smoking and hissing in the snow. She kicked her jammed door open and sprinted into the labyrinth of pedestrian alleyways, melting into the shadows of the city. She was bleeding from a cut on her forehead, and her breath plumed in the freezing air like dragon smoke. But as she disappeared into the Vienna night, the crushing weight of betrayal had been replaced by something far more dangerous. Clarity. Elias was innocent. The blood of her team was on Vance's hands. She pulled the burner phone from her pocket, the one she had taken from the safe house, and looked at the final set of coordinates Elias had hidden in the ledger. The Swiss Alps. I'm coming, Elias, she whispered to the wind. And I'm bringing the fire with me. The Swiss Alps didn't care about JSOC, global syndicates, or rogue operatives. Up here, at 10,000 feet, the only law was the cold. A massive blizzard was tearing across the jagged peaks, reducing visibility to less than 20 yards. The wind didn't just howl, it screamed, driving shards of ice into Captain Maya Hayes's face like shattered glass. She trudged through knee-deep snow, her white winter camouflage gear rendering her nearly invisible against the furious whiteout. Ahead of her, barely a silhouette in the storm, stood the abandoned ranger station. It was a sturdy, weathered cabin built of heavy timber and stone, clinging to the edge of a sheer drop-off. No smoke rose from the chimney. No light leaked from the frosted windows. He's in there. Maya felt it in her marrow. The coordinates from the ledger had led her straight into this frozen purgatory. She unholstered her Sig Sauer, her gloved finger resting just outside the trigger guard. The cold was slowing her joints, stiffening her muscles, but her mind was hyper-focused. The files from Vienna had proven Elias was framed, but she still didn't have the whole picture. She needed him alive, but catching a ghost alive was the most dangerous game a hunter could play. Maya approached the cabin from the blind side. Avoiding the front porch, she pressed her back against the freezing timber wall. Listening, over the roar of the wind, she heard nothing. She reached the back door. Locked. She didn't bother with lockpicks, her hands were too numb. Instead, she stepped back, raised her right boot, and delivered a devastating front kick right next to the deadbolt. The splintered wood gave way with a sharp crack. Maya went in fast, sweeping the muzzle of her weapon across the gloomy interior. Clear right, clear left, she breathed. The cabin was freezing, the air stale. Dust motes danced in the pale light filtering through the snow-caked windows. In the center of the room sat a heavy oak table. On it rested a disassembled sniper rifle, a steaming cup of black coffee, and a tactical radio. Steaming, Maya spun around just as a shadow detached itself from the darkest corner of the ceiling rafters. Elias Thorne dropped down silently, not with a gun, but with a heavy wooden chair, swinging it in a brutal, sweeping arc. Maya ducked, the chair smashing into the wall behind her and exploding into kindling. Before she could raise her Sig, Elias was on her. He didn't look like a man on the run, he moved with the terrifying, explosive grace of a predator in its prime. He slapped the barrel of her gun away, stepping inside her guard. The fight was instant, visceral, and utterly exhausting. This wasn't a brawl, it was high-speed, tactical chess between a master and his greatest creation. Maya threw a vicious elbow aimed at his jaw. Elias caught it with an open palm, using her momentum to spin her around, locking her arm behind her back. Leverage. Maya, Elias's voice barked, not in her memory this time, but right in her ear. Breathless and real. You're fighting the muscle, not the joint. Shut up, Maya snarled, dropping her weight and driving her heel backward into his shin. Elias grunted, his grip loosening just enough for her to break free. She spun, drawing her combat knife from her vest in one fluid motion. And lunge. Elias sidestepped the thrust with an infuriating calmness, parrying her forearm and delivering a palm strike to her chest that sent her crashing backward through the cabin's front window. Glass shattered. Maya tumbled out into the raging blizzard, hitting the snow-covered porch hard. She rolled, coming up on one knee, gasping for air as the freezing wind knocked the breath out of her lungs. Elias stepped slowly through the broken window frame, the blizzard swirling around his dark, tactical coat. He looked older than she remembered. The gray at his temples had spread, and the lines around his eyes were carved deeper by the weight of the last 18 months. But his eyes, steely, calculating, and devastatingly calm, were exactly the same. You're leading with your anger. Echo, Elias said, his voice easily cutting through the howling wind. It makes you predictable. Vance's cleaners almost killed you in Berlin because you were distracted. Don't you dare say his name. Maya screamed, the raw emotion finally bleeding into her voice. She scrambled to her feet, raising her Sig Sauer and pointing it dead center at his chest. Her hands, usually steady as bedrock, were shaking violently. Elias stopped. He stood 10 feet away, completely exposed on the open porch, the sheer drop of the mountain just yards to his left. He didn't reach for a weapon. He didn't take a defensive stance. He simply raised both hands in the air, open-palmed, a gesture of surrender. I'm not fighting you anymore, Maya, he said softly. Pick up a weapon, she yelled, tears of frustration, anger, and betrayal mixing with the melting snow on her cheeks. You taught me never to surrender. You taught me to fight until the blood stops pumping. Pick it up. I taught you to survive. Elias corrected gently. And right now, to survive, you need to hear the truth. I saw the files in Vienna. Maya choked out, keeping the gun leveled at his head. Her finger tightened on the trigger. NATO rounds. JSOC weapons. Vance ordered the hit. But why did you run? Why did you leave me thinking you were a monster? Why did you let me hate you? The wind whipped between them, carrying the heavy silence. Slowly, deliberately, Elias lowered his hands. Maya tensed, but he merely reached into the inner pocket of his coat. He pulled out a small, encrypted titanium hard drive and tossed it into the snow at Maya's feet. Because if I had stayed, Vance would have killed you too, Elias said, the stoic mask finally cracking, revealing a profound, agonizing sorrow. Mateen stumbled onto Vance's black book operations. He was selling weaponized biological agents to the highest bidder to fund off the book's wars. When he realized we knew, he ordered the purge in Vienna. Maya stared at the drive in the snow, her gun wavering. I was the only one who made it out. Elias continued, taking a slow step toward her. She didn't shoot. If I had come back to Langley, I would have been a dead man. But worse, if I had contacted you. If Vance even suspected you knew the truth, he would have sent the cleaners to your door that very night. You were my blind spot. Maya, you still are. The absolute sincerity in his voice broke the last of Maya's defenses. The icy walls she had built around her heart since Vienna crumbled into dust. She was no longer Captain Hayes, the lethal Tier 1 operative. She was just Maya again, the broken girl who had lost her family, standing in front of the only father she had left. With a ragged sob, Maya lowered the gun. It fell from her trembling fingers, burying itself in the deep snow. She dropped to her knees, burying her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking uncontrollably as years of suppressed grief and misplaced hatred finally poured out. Elias walked over, kneeling in the snow in front of her. He didn't say a word. He just reached out and pulled her into a tight, fierce embrace, shielding her from the biting wind of the blizzard. I've got you, kid, he whispered, resting his chin on the top of her head. I'm right here. For a long moment, the world faded away. There was no JSOC, no Vance, no treason, just two ghosts, haunting the edge of the world, finding a brief moment of warmth in the freezing dark. But the warmth couldn't last. Elias pulled back, his eyes hardening as he looked down at the titanium drive in the snow. "That drive holds everything," he said, his voice shifting back to the grim, tactical tone of a commander. "Bank transfers, audio recordings, buyer manifests. It's enough to put Vance in a black site for the rest of his natural life. And dismantle his entire corrupt network." Maya wiped her face with the back of her sleeve, picking up the drive. The metal was freezing, but it felt like holding a live grenade. "So, what's the play? We leak it to the press?" "The press can be bought. The internet can be scrubbed." Elias shook his head, standing up and pulling Maya to her feet. "If we want to cut the head off the snake, we have to do it where it hurts." Maya looked at him, her tactical mind booting back up, analyzing the impossible variables. "You don't mean?" A dangerous, predatory smile ghosted across Elias Thorne's face. "Oh, I do. We're taking it straight to the director's doorstep. We're going to breach the master servers at Langley." Maya stared at him, the sheer audacity of the plan stealing her breath. Breaking into the CIA's heavily fortified headquarters was suicide. It was impossible. But looking at the man beside her, the phantom who had just returned from the dead, Maya felt a familiar, thrilling surge of adrenaline. "All right, old man," Maya said, a hard, determined glint returning to her eyes. She picked up her gun from the snow, holstering it with a decisive snap. "Let's go hunt a director." The interior of the ranger station was a stark contrast to the howling whiteout outside. But it felt no warmer. Elias had managed to get a small fire going in the stone hearth. The dry pine snapping and hissing, casting long, dancing shadows across the heavy timber walls. Maya sat at the oak table, wrapped in a coarse wool blanket Elias had tossed her. She watched in silence as he booted up a battered, military-grade Panasonic Toughbook. He didn't plug it into an outlet. There was no power here, relying instead on a modified, high-capacity battery pack. The screen flickered to life, bathing Elias's hardened features in a pale blue glow. He took the titanium drive Maya had dropped in the snow, wiped it carefully on his sleeve, and inserted it into the port. "Everything on this drive is encrypted with a localized cipher," Elias said, his fingers flying across the rugged keyboard. Vance thought he was clever. He kept his dirty laundry off the JSOC mainframes, storing it on private servers in Geneva. "I spent 6 months tracking the data crumbs before Vienna." A progress bar filled the screen, followed by a stream of unlocking code. Then, a massive directory appeared. "Here." Elias clicked on a folder labeled Project Chimera. "Read it." Maya leaned in, her eyes scanning the digitized documents. They were manifests, shipping routes, financial transfers routed through shell corporations in the Caymans, Cyprus, and Macau. But it was the cargo that made the blood freeze in her veins. "VX nerve gas?" Maya whispered, the words tasting like poison. "Weaponized hemorrhagic fever? He was selling Class A biological agents to the Zarqawi syndicate?" "At 10 times the market value," Elias confirmed, his voice devoid of emotion, the tone of a man who had stared into the abyss for far too long. "Vance isn't just a director. He's a warlord in a suit. He used the profits to fund off the book's wetwork, black ops that even the Pentagon didn't know about. He was building his own private army within JSOC." Maya's mind raced, connecting the dots that had haunted her for 3 years. "And your team in Vienna?" "We were tracking a suspected terrorist cell," Elias said, his jaw tightening. "Instead, we walked right into the middle of Vance's transaction. We saw the buyers. We saw the JSOC-issued cargo crates. Marcus managed to intercept a sat phone transmission before the ambush started." Elias clicked on an audio file. "Listen." The speakers of the Toughbook crackled with static. Then, a voice cut through the noise. It was crisp, authoritative, and chillingly familiar. "Director Vance. The asset delivery is compromised. I repeat, the Vienna drop is compromised. Alpha team is on site and has visual." Another voice, a mercenary commander, responded. "Orders, Director?" There was a 3-second pause on the recording. To Maya, it felt like an eternity. "Sanitize the area," Vance's voice ordered, cold and clinical. "Leave no witnesses. Make it look like a cartel hit. Alpha team is officially disavowed." The recording ended. The silence in the cabin was heavier than the snow burying the roof. Maya stared at the black screen. The echo of Vance's command ringing in her ears. Sanitize the area. That was how a decorated director of intelligence talked about the lives of 6 American heroes. They weren't soldiers to him. They were just dirt that needed to be swept under the rug. A profound, terrifying numbness washed over her. The foundation of her entire reality, her belief in the badge. The flag, the mission, shattered completely. She had spent the last 3 years hunting the only man who had tried to save them, while taking orders from the butcher who pulled the trigger. Slowly, her hands trembling, Maya reached up to her collar. She unzipped her tactical jacket and reached underneath, pulling the heavy, silver dog tags over her head. Attached to the chain was her JSOC challenge coin, a symbol of her elite status. Her loyalty, her life. She looked at the metal in her palm. It felt dirty, tainted with the blood of her friends. Without a word, Maya stood up, walked over to the stone hearth, and tossed the dog tags and the coin directly into the flames. The metal clattered against the burning pine. Elias watched her from the table, his eyes softening. He knew exactly what that gesture meant. It was the death of Captain Maya Hayes. I'm done, Maya said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous gravel. She turned back to Elias, the firelight reflecting in her eyes, turning them into cold, hard obsidian. I'm not a soldier anymore. I don't follow their rules of engagement. I don't answer to their chain of command. She walked back to the table, slamming her hands flat against the wood. We take this to Langley, Maya stated, not as a suggestion, but as an absolute fact. We upload this to the global mainframe. We broadcast his sins to every intelligence agency, news outlet, and government server on the planet. We burn his empire to the ground. A slow, proud smile spread across Elias's face. The ghost had finally found his echo. It's a suicide mission, kid, Elias warned, closing the tough book and pulling the drive. Langley's physical security is impenetrable. Biometrics, thermal imaging, acoustic sensors. If we go in, there's a 99% chance we don't come out. Then we make the 1% count, Maya replied, picking up her Sig Sauer and checking the magazine out of pure muscle memory. Elias nodded, grabbing his tactical radio to pack it away. But as his hand brushed the receiver, a sharp, rhythmic pinging sound cut through the cabin. Both of them froze. Elias looked at the radio, then slowly looked up at Maya, the color draining from his face. Maya, did you bring your JSOC-issued comms gear? Maya's eyes widened. I ditched the comms in Berlin. I only kept the burner you left me. She patted down her pockets. Her tactical vest. Suddenly, she stopped, her hand hovering over the thick, Kevlar weave shoulder pad of her jacket. The beacon, she whispered, her blood running cold. JSOC Tier 1 operatives were surgically implanted or micro-stitched with passive RFID trackers for body recovery in case of Kia. It was standard protocol, but Vance had activated it. He had been tracking her the whole time. Elias grabbed a heavy combat knife from the table and tossed it to her. Dig it out, now. Maya didn't hesitate. She ripped her jacket off, biting down hard on her lip as she sliced into the thick fabric of her own shoulder pad. Tearing through the Kevlar, she dug the blade in, popping out a tiny, black, pill-shaped transmitter. She threw it on the floor and crushed it with the heel of her boot. But as the plastic shattered, a new sound bled through the howling wind outside. It wasn't the storm. It was a deep, rhythmic thumping. Thwup, 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 thwup. Helicopter rotors, heavy military transport, and there was more than one. Elias grabbed his disassembled sniper rifle, his hands moving with blinding speed as he snapped the barrel, receiver, and stock together. They didn't come to arrest us, Maya. Vance sent the heavy hitters. They're here to level the mountain. Maya racked the slide of her Sig Sauer, grabbing a spare magazine from the table. The anger that had been simmering inside her ignited into a cold, focused fury. Let them come, Maya said, taking her position by the shattered front window, the snow blowing into her face. We'll send them back to Vance in bags. The rhythmic THWUP of the rotor blades didn't just cut through the howling blizzard, it vibrated in Maya's chest. A heavy, mechanical heartbeat of impending death. Inside the freezing cabin, the atmosphere shifted instantly from profound revelation to pure, localized war. There was no time for fear. No time for anger. Muscle memory and years of brutal conditioning took the wheel. Maya and Elias moved as if they shared a single nervous system. Without exchanging a single word, they fell into a synchronized tactical dance they hadn't practiced in over 3 years. Elias kicked the heavy oak table, flipping it onto its side to create a makeshift barricade against the back wall. Maya grabbed the remaining ammunition, slamming a fresh magazine into her Sig Sauer and tossing 3 spare clips onto the floorboard next to Elias. "Thermal imaging will see right through this timber," Elias barked, chambering a massive .338 Lapua Magnum round into his heavily customized bolt-action sniper rifle. "They're not going to knock Maya, they're going to erase the building." As if on cue, the snow-choked night outside erupted. 3 blindingly bright spotlights pierced the blizzard, converging on the cabin, turning the interior into a glaring, washed-out stage. The deafening roar of the helicopters, 2 Mega Henrys -60 Black Hawks, hovered just 50 yards away, their rotor wash whipping the snow into a localized hurricane. Then came the sound of tearing canvas. It was the terrifying, unmistakable roar of an M134 minigun. A solid stream of tracer rounds, 3,000 bullets a minute, slammed into the front of the ranger station. The heavy timber walls didn't just splinter, they disintegrated. Wood, stone, and glass exploded inward. Maya hit the floor, covering her head as a tidal wave of shrapnel washed over her. The noise was absolute, a physical force that pressed the air from her lungs. The coffee mug on the table shattered into dust. The floorboards ripped open, exposing the frozen dirt beneath. "Keep your head down," Elias roared over the mechanical screaming of the gunship. The barrage lasted for 10 agonizing seconds. When it finally ceased, the front half of the cabin was simply gone, blown open to the raging storm. The wind howled through the wreckage, feeding the small fire in the hearth until it roared. "Repelling lines," Maya yelled, peering through the smoke and blowing snow. Dark silhouettes were dropping from the bellies of the Black Hawks. Vance's cleaners, Tier 1 operators equipped with state-of-the-art night vision, heavy body armor, and suppressed submachine guns. "Engage at will, Echo," Elias said smoothly, resting the barrel of his sniper rifle over the edge of the overturned table. Maya didn't hesitate. She rolled out from behind cover, dropping to a crouch near the ruined doorway. 2 cleaners advanced through the deep snow, their laser sights cutting green arcs through the whiteout. She took a breath, finding the calm center of the chaos. Center of gravity. Squeeze. Don't pull. Fut-fut. 2 suppressed shots. The first cleaner dropped instantly, a round catching him in the unprotected gap between his helmet and tactical vest. The second operator immediately laid down covering fire, chipping away at the stone hearth next to Maya's head. Before Maya could return fire, the deafening boom of Elias's .338 Lapua echoed through the ruins. The sheer kinetic energy of the heavy sniper round hit the second operator dead center, throwing him backward into a snowbank as if he'd been struck by a freight train. 2 down, 4 pushing the right flank, Elias called out, cycling the bolt of his rifle with lightning speed. "I've got the flank," Maya shouted, sprinting through the debris toward the rear kitchen area. She kicked open the splintered back door just as a cleaner breached it. They collided in the doorway. The operative brought the butt of his MP7 up, smashing Maya across the jaw. She tasted copper, her vision swimming, but she used his forward momentum against him, grabbing his tactical harness and throwing herself backward. They crashed onto the frozen kitchen floor. The operative was heavier, instantly pinning her gun arm with his knee. He reached for his combat knife, the steel flashing in the dim firelight. "When they pin you, they sacrifice their balance," Elias's voice echoed in her mind. Maya didn't try to free her arm. Instead, she brought her left leg up, wrapping it tightly around the operative's neck in a brutal triangle choke. She locked her ankles and squeezed with terrifying force, simultaneously using her free hand to gouge her thumb into the pressure point under his jaw. The operative panicked, thrashing wildly, his knife stabbing uselessly into the wooden floorboards. Within seconds, his eyes rolled back, and he went completely limp. Maya shoved his heavy body off her, gasping for air, grabbing his dropped MP7 submachine gun. Maya, the bird. Elias's voice cracked over the roar of the wind. Maya scrambled back to the main room. The second Black Hawk had banked around the sheer cliff drop-off and was hovering level with the ruined cabin, bringing its minigun to bear directly on their position. He's got a firing angle. We can't survive another pass. Maya screamed, firing short, controlled bursts from the MP7 at the helicopter's armored underbelly, knowing it was practically useless against the military-grade plating. I need 3 seconds of steady hover to hit the tail rotor, Elias shouted, his eye glued to the scope, the rifle barrel tracking the massive aircraft. Draw his fire. It was a suicide play. But Maya had stopped caring about survival the moment she tossed her dog tags into the fire. She stepped completely out of cover, standing in the open breach of the ruined cabin. She raised the MP7 and emptied the entire magazine directly at the cockpit's armored glass, screaming into the storm. The gunner in the Black Hawk saw her. The massive minigun swiveled, its barrels beginning to spin with a high-pitched whine. The minigun roared to life. A line of tracer fire chewing up the snow, racing directly toward Maya's feet in a straight line of destruction. 2. Maya didn't blink. She didn't flinch. She stood her ground, a phantom staring down a mechanical dragon. 3. Boom. Elias fired. The massive .338 armor-piercing round crossed the distance in a fraction of a millisecond. It didn't aim for the cockpit. It struck the delicate, fast-spinning hub of the helicopter's tail rotor. Metal shrieked. The tail rotor shattered into a dozen pieces, exploding outward. Instantly, the Black Hawk lost its anti-torque stabilization. The massive aircraft began to spin violently out of control, the pilots fighting a losing battle against physics. The minigun fire swung wildly into the sky as the helicopter careened away from the cliffside. With a grinding, metallic crunch, the Black Hawk slammed into the side of the mountain 100 yards away. A massive fireball erupted into the night, momentarily turning the blizzard bright orange and sending a shockwave of heat that washed over Maya's face. The remaining ground operators, seeing their air support decimated, hesitated. That hesitation was all Elias needed. He grabbed Maya's shoulder, pulling her back. We're out of time. The second bird will circle back. We move now. We can't leave them a trail. Maya panted, grabbing the titanium drive from the table and stuffing it deep into her vest. I'm not planning to, Elias replied grimly. He reached under the overturned table and pulled out a block of C4 explosive, complete with a remote detonator. He had planted it the moment he arrived at the cabin. Let's give Vance's boys a warm Swiss welcome. They sprinted out the back door, plunging waist deep into the freezing snow, sliding down the steep embankment away from the burning wreckage of the first helicopter. Above them, the second Black Hawk roared back over the ridge, its searchlights sweeping the ruined cabin, operators fast roping down into the debris. Elias stopped behind an outcrop of jagged rocks 50 yards down the slope. He looked at Maya. She nodded. He pressed the detonator. The ranger station disappeared in a blinding flash of white light. A second later, the thunderous roar of the explosion hit them, an avalanche of sound that shook the very foundations of the mountain. A massive plume of fire and debris shot into the sky, swallowing the cleaners who had just breached the perimeter. Maya leaned against the cold stone, her chest heaving, watching the flames lick at the falling snow. She was bleeding, bruised, and freezing, but her mind was sharper than a razor. They'll think we died in the blast, Elias said, his breath pluming in the dark. It buys us maybe 48 hours before Vance realizes there are no bodies in the ash. 48 hours, Maya repeated, looking away from the fire and down into the dark, bottomless valley below. The storm was already erasing their tracks. She turned back to her mentor, the ghost who had taught her how to hunt in the dark. Get me a flight to Virginia, Elias, she said, her voice colder than the alpine wind. It's time to go home. The rain in Virginia was different from the rain in Seattle. In Seattle, it had been a hunter. Here, in the sprawling, manicured forest surrounding Langley, it was a shroud. The George Bush Center for Intelligence, the heart of the CIA and the covert operational hub for JSOC, loomed in the distance like a modern fortress. It was a sprawling complex of reinforced concrete, polarized glass, and invisible electromagnetic shields. To the outside world, it was an impenetrable monument to American security. To Captain Maya Hayes and Elias Thorne, crouching in the muddy underbrush half a mile past the outer perimeter fence. It was the belly of the beast. 48 hours had passed since the explosion in the Alps. They had crossed the Atlantic in the cargo hold of a black market freighter. Operating entirely off the grid, they were ghosts, dead on paper, but lethally alive in the shadows. The perimeter is monitored by seismic sensors, thermal sweeps, and automated drone patrols, Elias whispered, lowering a pair of high-powered night vision binoculars. He was dressed in a sleek, matte black infiltration suit, blending perfectly with the wet bark of the trees. If we trip a single wire, we'll have a heavily armed quick response force on us in 90 seconds. Maya adjusted the suppressed MP7 slung across her chest. She had traded her anger for an absolute, chilling focus. We're not going over the fence. We're going under it. Elias offered a grim smile. 10 years ago, they hired me as a red team consultant to test their physical security protocols. I found a flaw they said was statistically impossible to exploit: the subterranean cooling intake for the sub-level 4 server farms. Water filtration, Maya realized, her mind visualizing the schematics. It draws water from the Potomac to cool the processors. Exactly. It's a 3-foot-wide pipe, completely submerged. The grates are alarmed, but the acoustics of the rushing water mask the sound of a cutting torch. Elias explained, once we're through, we have a straight swim into the primary cooling reservoir directly beneath the master servers. Statistically impossible, Maya murmured, pulling a sleek, underwater rebreather mask over her face. Sounds like our kind of math. They moved through the forest like smoke, bypassing the outer patrols with terrifying ease. They slipped into the freezing, turbulent waters of the intake canal. The swim was a claustrophobic nightmare. The pipe was pitch black, the current actively fighting them, threatening to smash their bodies against the rough concrete walls. Maya followed the faint glow of the chem light attached to Elias's belt, her lungs burning despite the rebreather. They reached the massive titanium grate. Elias pulled a specialized thermite cutting pen from his harness. The blue flame hissed violently underwater, melting through the inch-thick titanium bars in agonizingly slow seconds. Maya kept her eyes on her waterproof chronometer. The drone patrol overhead completed its circuit every 4 minutes. With a dull, underwater clunk, the grate gave way. They squeezed through, kicking hard against the current, and surfaced inside a cavernous, dimly lit reservoir. The air smelled heavily of ozone, bleach, and raw electricity. Above them, suspended on a massive steel platform, was the central nervous system of the United States intelligence community, the Corps. They pulled themselves out of the water, silently stripping off their wet gear to reveal dry tactical suits underneath. Elias pointed to a heavy, pressurized door at the top of a metal staircase. That's the service entrance to sub-level 4, Elias whispered, water dripping from his graying hair. The door is secured by a dynamic biometric lock. It requires a retinal scan and a localized heartbeat signature from a level 8 clearance. Neither of which we have, Maya noted. No, Elias agreed, pulling a small, translucent film from a waterproof pouch. But I lifted this from Vance's personal safe house in Geneva 3 years ago. It's a polymerized mold of his right retina. As for the heartbeat, he pulled out a small, metallic disc with 2 nodes. This is a cardiac spoofer. It mimics the electrical rhythm of a resting human heart. They ascended the stairs, their boots making zero sound. Maya provided cover, her MP7 raised, her eyes scanning the catwalks above for security cameras. They were in the blind spots Elias had mapped out a decade ago. Elias placed the spoofer over the biometric pad and carefully held the retinal film up to the scanner. A red laser swept over the film. Maya held her breath. The silence was deafening. Click. The light on the panel turned from crimson to a soft, glowing green. The heavy pressurized door hissed, unlocking with a pneumatic sigh. They slipped inside. The server room was massive. A cathedral of blinking lights and towering black monoliths humming with the processing power of a million secrets. The temperature dropped drastically, chilled by the massive vents they had just crawled out of. The master terminal is in the center, Elias signaled, moving with liquid grace down the aisle of servers. We plug the drive in. I bypass the firewall, and we broadcast the files to every major news outlet and allied intelligence agency simultaneously. They reached the central console. It was a sleek, minimalist desk surrounded by bulletproof glass. Maya pulled the titanium drive from her vest, her fingers brushing the cold metal. This was it, the culmination of 3 years of lies, running, and blood. She handed it to Elias. He slotted it into the terminal. His fingers flew across the keyboard, a blurry dance of code and bypass protocols. Firewall breached, Elias muttered, his eyes locked on the screen. Initiating global upload. It's going to take exactly 2 minutes to encrypt and scatter the data packets. We need to hold this room. A progress bar appeared on the massive monitor above them. 10%, 15%. Suddenly, the ambient hum of the servers stopped. The blue LED lights lining the aisles violently snapped to a harsh, flashing crimson. A klaxon alarm shattered the silence, wailing with a terrifying, rhythmic intensity. Maya spun around, raising her weapon. Heavy magnetic locks slammed into place on every door in the sublevel. The exit they had just used sealed shut with a final, booming thud. They were trapped. A voice echoed from the overhead PA system. It wasn't an automated security warning. It was calm, measured, and dripping with aristocratic arrogance. I have to admit, Elias, I didn't think you had the stomach to come back to Langley. Maya's blood ran cold. Vance. And Captain Hayes. The director's voice continued, echoing through the crimson-lit room. I saw the thermal bloom in the Alps. I knew you survived. You always were too stubborn to die when you were told. 35%, 40%. The progress bar crawled. He knew. Maya whispered to Elias, her eyes scanning the catwalks. He's been waiting for us. You thought you were hacking my master server. Vance's voice taunted. But you just plugged that drive into a closed-loop quarantine terminal. Your upload is going nowhere. Elias, you brought the evidence right back to me. Elias's hand stopped typing. He looked at the screen, a grim realization settling over his features. He's right. The external routing is jammed. The data is only broadcasting to the internal JSOC network. Can you reroute it? Maya asked, her voice tight. Not from this console, Elias said, looking up at a heavy, reinforced steel door on the far side of the room. The manual override for the external communications array is in the auxiliary control room. Through that door. Alpha Team, breach sub-level 4, shoot to kill, Vance ordered over the intercom. The heavy doors at the far end of the server farm exploded open. A dozen heavily armored cleaners poured into the room, their laser sights cutting through the red emergency lights. Flashbangs detonated, turning the room into a chaotic strobe-lit nightmare. Covering fire, Elias roared, drawing his weapon. Maya didn't hesitate. The stealth mission was over. The loud war had begun. She ducked behind a row of servers, the metal sparking and screeching as high-caliber rounds tore into the delicate electronics around them. I'll hold them off, Maya yelled over the deafening roar of gunfire, emptying a magazine toward the advancing squad. Get to the auxiliary room. Override the comms. Elias looked at her, the master looking at his final, greatest creation. There was a profound sadness in his eyes, mixed with immense pride. He knew what she was offering. She was offering to be the shield. 2 minutes. Maya, Elias shouted, vaulting over the console and sprinting toward the auxiliary door under the hail of bullets. Give me 2 minutes. Maya dropped an empty magazine, slamming a fresh one home. The cleaners were closing in, moving with tactical precision. She took a deep breath, the scent of burning ozone and gunpowder filling her lungs. She wasn't just Captain Hayes anymore. She was Elias Thorne's echo. And she was about to show Vance's army exactly what that meant. She stepped out from cover, the MP7 roaring, painting the red room with the brilliant, deadly flashes of muzzle fire. Sub-level 4 was no longer a server room. It was a slaughterhouse bathed in flashing crimson light. The air was thick with the acrid stench of burning wiring, pulverized concrete, and cordite. Deafening bursts of 5.56 mm gunfire echoed off the titanium walls, drowning out the blaring klaxons. Captain Maya Hayes was a blur of lethal motion, darting between the towering black server racks. She dropped to one knee, leaning out just enough to fire a 3-round burst from her MP7. A cleaner taking cover behind a cooling unit jerked backward, his helmet shattering against the glass. Click, click. Her MP7 was dry. She dropped the submachine gun, seamlessly drawing her Sig Sauer P226 in a fluid motion. 6 down. She hissed through gritted teeth, blood trickling from a graze on her cheek. 6 left. You're delaying the inevitable, Captain. Vance's voice purred over the intercom, echoing from the reinforced observation deck suspended 20 feet above the floor. He was standing behind bulletproof glass, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, watching the chaos unfold like a god looking down at an ant farm. Even if you kill my men, the building is on absolute lockdown. You will die in this room. Maya ignored him. She glanced at the heavy steel door of the auxiliary control room where Elias was trapped. Elias, status, she yelled over her shoulder. Inside the small room, Elias Thorne was frantically ripping access panels off the wall, his hands covered in grease and exposed wiring. He looked at the secondary terminal screen. The upload progress bar was stuck. Upload stalled. Main trunk line severed. A stray high-caliber round had punched through the wall, shattering the primary fiber optic relay connecting the sub-level to the outside world. They hit the relay. Maya. Elias's voice crackled through her earpiece, strained and desperate. The data can't leave the internal network. Fix it, Maya shouted, firing blindly around the corner to keep 2 advancing cleaners pinned down. Splinters of metal showered over her as they returned fire, shredding the server rack she was using for cover. I can't fix it from in here, Elias replied, staring at the severed cables. He looked through the reinforced glass window of the auxiliary door, his eyes locking onto the central data hub located dead in the middle of the room, right in the open kill zone. The only way to bridge the connection is to manually hardwire the bypass directly into the central hub. Maya realized what he meant instantly. Her heart plummeted into her stomach. No, Elias. It's suicide. They have crossfire established over the center. Don't you dare. But Elias Thorne was already moving. He grabbed a heavy spool of bypass cable, his face setting into a mask of absolute, terrifying calm. He had lived his whole life in the shadows. It was time to die in the light. Get ready to hit execute on the central terminal. Maya, Elias said, his voice stripping away the commander, the ghost, and the legend, leaving only the mentor. When the light turns green, you push the button. Promise me. Elias, wait. The heavy steel door of the auxiliary room kicked open. Elias sprinted out into the flashing red strobe lights, completely exposing himself to Vance's men. Target in the open. Fire. The cleaner squad leader roared. Every weapon in the room turned on Elias. Maya screamed, breaking cover and charging toward the terminal, firing her Sig Sauer with desperate, terrifying accuracy. She put a bullet straight through the squad leader's visor, then double-tapped another operator. But there were too many guns. The first bullet caught Elias in the left shoulder, spinning him violently. He grunted, stumbling, but didn't fall. The second round tore through his thigh. Maya watched in agonizing slow motion. The man who had taught her how to dodge death, the ghost who walked through walls, was being torn apart. Elias crashed into the central data hub, his blood smearing across the pristine white casing. His hands, trembling violently from shock and trauma, ripped the casing off. Bullets sparked against the metal around him, showering him in sparks. He looked up at the observation deck. Vance was staring down, his smug smile finally faltering. Elias jammed the bypass cable into the primary port, his fingers slipping on his own blood, and violently cranked the manual override lever. A massive surge of electricity hummed through the floor. Above Maya, the central monitor flared to life. The connection was bridged. The prompt flashed on the screen, global broadcast ready, awaiting execution. Elias collapsed against the hub, his breathing ragged, 3 more rounds slammed into his tactical vest, finally dropping him to the floor. "Elias!" Maya screamed, her voice tearing her throat. Elias turned his head, his vision fading, his eyes locking onto hers. He gave her a weak, bloody nod. Maya's vision blurred with hot tears. She slammed her blood-soaked hand down onto the "execute" key. The massive screen shifted from flashing red to a blinding, brilliant green. Uploading. 20%, 50%, 100%. Transmission complete. In that exact second, gigabytes of classified files, audio recordings, and financial ledgers detailing Project Chimera were blasted to the servers of the New York Times, The Washington Post, MI6, Interpol, and the United Nations. Vance's dark empire was laid bare for the entire world to see. The remaining 3 cleaners froze, looking at their own tactical monitors as the alert of the global leak flashed across their screens. The mission was burned. Vance was burned. They dropped their weapons, stepping back into the shadows. Maya didn't care about the files anymore. She dropped her gun and slid across the blood-slicked floor, grabbing Elias and pulling him into her lap. "No, no, no, Elias, stay with me," Maya sobbed, pressing her hands frantically against the massive wound in his chest, trying to stop the impossible flow of blood. "We're getting out of here. You promised me." Elias coughed, a weak, wet sound. He reached up, his blood-stained hand gently touching Maya's cheek, wiping away a tear. He felt so incredibly cold. "We did it, kid," he whispered, his voice barely a breath. "The ghosts, they can finally rest. Don't leave me," Maya begged, the fierce, lethal operator reduced to a heartbroken daughter. "You're the only family I have." Elias offered a faint, incredibly peaceful smile. "You don't need me anymore. Maya, you haven't needed me for a long time." His eyes began to lose focus, staring up at the green lights of the servers. "You were my echo, but now, you're the voice. Make it loud." His hand slipped from her cheek, hitting the metal floor with a soft thud. Elias Thorne let out one final, quiet breath, and the ghost of JSOC was gone. Maya knelt there in the silence, the blaring klaxon sounding like a million miles away. She held him against her chest, her tears mixing with the blood on his tactical vest. She stayed like that for a long time, letting the grief wash over her, breaking her completely. But when Maya finally laid him down and stood up, the grief was gone. In its place was a terrifying, absolute emptiness. The fire had burned out, leaving only cold, hard steel. She picked up her Sig Sauer. It had 1 bullet left. Above her, the mechanical lock on the observation deck hissed. The global leak had triggered a total system reset, unlocking the doors. Maya walked up the metal stairs. Her footsteps were slow, deliberate, and utterly silent. She kicked the door to the observation deck open. Vance was frantically typing at an emergency terminal, trying to wipe local drives, his face pale with panic. He spun around as Maya entered, drawing a silver 1911 pistol from his suit jacket. Maya didn't duck. She didn't seek cover. She just walked straight toward him. Vance's hand shook. The aristocratic arrogance had completely vanished, replaced by the pathetic terror of a cornered rat. "Maya, listen to me. The Director of National Intelligence will be here in minutes. If you kill me, you'll never stop running. I have money. I can clear your name." Maya raised her weapon. Her heart rate was a steady 60 beats per minute. Total control. "This isn't for my name, Vance," Maya said, her voice devoid of any emotion, colder than the Swiss Alps. "This is for Vienna." She didn't hesitate. She didn't blink. Bang! The single bullet struck Vance precisely between the eyes. The director of JSOC collapsed backward, his body crashing into the glass, sliding down to the floor, dead before he even realized what had happened. Maya lowered her weapon. She looked down at the chaos below, at the body of the man who had taught her everything, resting in the center of the green-lit room. The checkmate was complete. The king was dead, but the board would never be the same. Maya turned her back on Vance, walking out of the observation deck and disappearing into the shadows of the George Bush Center for Intelligence. A ghost stepping into a world that would never see her coming. Paris, France, 6 months later. Autumn in Paris was a canvas of burnt orange and muted gold. The biting wind sweeping off the river Seine carried the scent of roasted chestnuts and impending rain. But to Maya, it felt like the first clean breath she had taken in years. She sat at a small, wrought iron table outside a quiet café in Le Marais. Her collar turned up against the chill. She looked different. The tactical gear and the harsh, military haircut were gone, replaced by a tailored wool trench coat and dark, shoulder-length hair. To the passing tourists and busy locals, she was just another face in the crowd. A beautiful, solitary woman enjoying an espresso. She took a sip of the bitter coffee, her eyes scanning the digital headline on the encrypted tablet resting on the table. Global fallout continues. Former JSOC director Marcus Vance posthumously stripped of honors as Project Chimera trials begin. The article detailed the sweeping indictments of over 40 high-ranking military and intelligence officials across 3 continents. The data burst from Sub-Level 4 had done its job. It had acted like a digital wildfire, burning away the rot that had infected the highest levels of global security. The corrupt syndicate Vance had built with American tax dollars and the blood of true patriots was entirely dismantled in the light of public scrutiny. Maya swiped to the next page of the secure dossier. It was a single, classified photograph. It showed the memorial wall at the CIA headquarters in Langley. Among the blank marble stars carved to honor those who died in the shadows, a new one had been recently chiseled. There was no name attached to it. There never was. But Maya knew exactly who it belonged to. Elias Thorne was finally resting. A quiet scraping of metal against the cobblestone pulled Maya from her thoughts. A man in his late 50s, wearing an immaculate gray suit and carrying a leather briefcase, pulled up the chair opposite hers and sat down. He didn't order anything. The agency spent 4 months trying to track the IP address you used to vanish from the Virginia grid, the man said, his voice smooth and diplomatic. He folded his hands on the table. They failed, of course. You're a very difficult woman to find, Captain Hayes. Maya didn't flinch. She didn't reach for the concealed weapon resting comfortably against her ribs. She simply took another sip of her espresso. It's just Maya now, Director Sterling, she replied, her voice calm and level. And I wasn't hiding. I just didn't want to be disturbed. Deputy Director Thomas Sterling, the man appointed to clean up Vance's colossal mess, offered a tight, acknowledging smile. Fair enough. But I didn't come here to arrest you. Maya, quite the opposite. He opened his briefcase and slid a thick, manila envelope across the table. The president has signed a full, classified pardon for your actions at Langley, Sterling explained, tapping the envelope. Furthermore, the Board of Inquiry has posthumously exonerated Elias Thorne and the entirety of your team in Vienna. They were heroes. And so are you. Maya looked at the envelope. It represented everything she had fought for. Vindication. Truth. There's a plane waiting at Charles de Gaulle, Sterling continued, leaning in slightly, his tone shifting to a persuasive pitch. The intelligence community is bleeding. Maya, we lost our compass. We need people who know the difference between the mission and the monster. I'm offering you your rank back. Full command of your own Tier 1 unit. You can rebuild the division the right way. The offer hung in the crisp Parisian air. It was the ultimate redemption arc. A chance to go home. Maya looked away from the envelope, her gaze drifting toward the gray, overcast sky. She thought of the farm. She thought of Vienna. She thought of the flashing red lights of Sub-Level 4. And the feeling of Elias's blood turning cold on her hands. The system hadn't just been hijacked by Vance. The system had allowed a man like Vance to thrive. It was a machine built on necessary evils. A machine that justified slaughter under the banner of national security. Slowly, Maya pushed the manila envelope back across the table. Sterling's smile faded. Maya, you can't be serious. You have no country, no agency, no backup. You're a ghost. Yes, Maya said softly, her obsidian eyes locking onto the director's. I am. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small, heavy object, placing it delicately on top of the envelope. It was the JSOC challenge coin she had retrieved from the ashes of the cabin in the Alps. It was scorched, scarred, and completely black. Elias taught me that trust is a vulnerability, Maya said, her voice carrying a quiet, terrifying conviction. He taught me that institutions will always inevitably protect themselves, even at the cost of the people they swore to serve. I don't believe in the badge anymore, Director. I only believe in the balance. Sterling stared at the ruined coin, a profound sense of defeat washing over him. He realized he wasn't talking to a rogue operative he could recruit. He was talking to a force of nature. What are you going to do? Sterling asked quietly. Maya stood up, dropping a €10 note on the table to cover her coffee. There are other Vances out there, Maya said, adjusting the collar of her coat. Men who hide behind flags and borders, thinking the dark belongs to them. I'm going to prove them wrong. She turned and began walking away, her boots clicking rhythmically against the cobblestones, blending effortlessly into the Parisian crowd. As she walked toward the Pont Neuf bridge, the gray clouds above finally broke, sending a light, misting rain down onto the city. Maya tilted her head up, letting the cool water hit her face. She wasn't running anymore, she was hunting. Deep in the recesses of her mind, a familiar, deeply resonant voice echoed one last time, cutting through the noise of the city. Once you see the dark, you can never go back to the light. But remember, Echo, even the devil fears the shadows when they start to whisper. A faint, dangerous smile ghosted across Maya's lips. The ghost of JSOC was dead, but his echo would ring out forever. London, United Kingdom, 2 weeks later. The rain in London didn't hunt like Seattle's, nor did it shroud like Virginia's. It merely wept, a constant, freezing drizzle that turned the neon lights of Canary Wharf into smeared, bleeding watercolors against the midnight sky. Captain Maya Hayes, though she no longer answered to that title, crouched on the edge of a 60-story rooftop. The freezing wind whipping her dark hair across her face. Across the 50-foot chasm of empty air stood the Shard's lesser-known, equally opulent neighbor, a private residential high-rise housing the global elite. Her target was in the penthouse. Julian Croft. Croft wasn't a soldier, a spy, or a politician. He was a billionaire hedge fund manager and a phantom financier. When Elias Thorne had leaked the Project Chimera files from Langley, Croft's name hadn't been in the primary manifest. He was too smart for that. He used layers of shell corporations to fund Vance's biological weapons program, effectively scrubbing his digital fingerprints before the empire fell. The intelligence agencies of the world couldn't touch him. The law had no jurisdiction over ghosts made of money. But Maya did. She pulled a compact, pneumatic grapple gun from her tactical thigh rig. She wasn't wearing JSOC gear anymore. Her suit was a bespoke matte black polymer weave, lightweight, sound dampening, and completely untraceable. She aimed the grapple at the reinforced steel beam supporting the penthouse's wraparound balcony. Flump! The titanium hook silently bit into the metal. She secured the line to her own rooftop, tested the tension, and stepped off the edge into the abyss. She slid across the freezing rain, a shadow suspended above the glowing veins of London. She landed softly on the balcony, immediately detaching the line. Through the floor-to-ceiling polarized glass, she could see the interior of the penthouse. It was a monument to excessive wealth, modern art, imported Italian marble, and Croft himself, sitting in a leather armchair by a roaring gas fireplace, swirling a glass of amber scotch. Guarding him were 4 private military contractors, ex-SAS by the look of their posture and the way they held their suppressed MP5 submachine guns. High-priced muscle. If they rely on their eyes, Maya, blind them. If they rely on their tech, break it. Elias's voice was a familiar, comforting hum in the back of her mind. She didn't fight the memories anymore, she weaponized them. Maya retrieved a small, customized EMP pulse grenade from her belt. She didn't throw it, she pressed it directly against the digital junction box on the exterior wall. Click. Instantly, the penthouse plunged into absolute darkness. The localized pulse fried the emergency backup generators and the security cameras in a microsecond. Inside, the mercenaries reacted immediately. Flashlights clicked on, sweeping the room. Perimeter breach. One of them barked in a thick British accent. Check the glass. Maya was already moving. She used a diamond-tipped glass cutter. carving a perfect circle near the balcony door's locking mechanism. She punched the glass out, reached in, and unlocked the door, slipping inside as silently as the rain. The first mercenary walked toward the balcony, his flashlight beam cutting through the dark. Maya didn't use a gun. Gunfire was messy. Gunfire drew the authorities before she was ready. She stepped out of the shadows, grabbing the barrel of his MP5 with her left hand, forcing it upward, while her right hand delivered a devastating strike to his carotid artery. The man's eyes rolled back, his brain deprived of oxygen, and she lowered his heavy body quietly to the Persian rug. One down. Bravo. Report. The lead mercenary called out from the hallway. Silence. Bravo. Maya melted back into the darkness. She moved through the opulent living space with predatory grace. The remaining 3 mercenaries tightened their formation around the study where Croft was hiding. She used their discipline against them. She picked up a heavy crystal decanter from a side table and tossed it across the room. It shattered against the marble wall. 2 of the mercenaries spun toward the noise, their flashlights illuminating the broken glass. It was a rookie mistake, distraction over target focus. Maya dropped from the decorative ceiling bulkhead right behind the 3rd mercenary, wrapping her arm around his neck and applying a textbook rear naked choke. He thrashed for 3 seconds before going limp. She let him drop, instantly drawing a customized, non-lethal taser baton. She stepped into the beam of the 2 remaining flashlights. Contact, one yelled, raising his weapon. Maya closed the distance in a blur. She ducked under the line of fire, driving the electrified baton into the first man's ribs. The high-voltage charge dropped him instantly, convulsing on the floor. The last mercenary lunged with a combat knife. Maya sidestepped, caught his wrist, twisted it until the bone snapped with a sickening crack, and delivered a spinning kick to his jaw. The penthouse was silent again, save for the rain beating against the glass. Maya stood in the center of the wreckage, her breathing even. She holstered her baton and walked slowly toward the heavy oak doors of the study. She kicked the doors open. Julian Croft was backed against his mahogany desk, a silver revolver shaking violently in his hands. The scotch had spilled down the front of his expensive silk shirt. "Stay back," Croft screamed, his aristocratic composure entirely shattered. "I have private security on speed dial. I have the London Metropolitan Police. Who are you?" Maya didn't stop walking. She stepped right up to the barrel of the revolver, the steel pressing gently against the center of her chest. She looked into Croft's terrified eyes. "Vance is dead," Maya said, her voice a low, terrifying whisper. "The cleanup crew is gone. All that's left of Project Chimera is the money. Your money." Croft's face drained of color. You're the JSOC ghost. The one from Langley. You're supposed to be dead." "I am," Maya replied coldly. "Which means you can't bargain with me. Julian, you can't buy me, and you certainly can't kill me." With blinding speed, she grabbed the cylinder of his revolver, preventing it from rotating, and ripped the gun from his hands. She tossed it casually into the fireplace. Croft collapsed into his leather chair, trembling. "What do you want? Name your price." Maya pulled a sleek, encrypted tablet from her coat and dropped it on his desk. It was already logged into his private offshore banking mainframe. "I don't want your money," Maya said, leaning over the desk, her face inches from his. "But I want you to watch it burn. You're going to transfer all $2.4 billion from your Cayman accounts to the global refugee relief funds listed on that screen. Every last penny." Croft stared at her in horror. "That will ruin me. The syndicate will kill me if those accounts are emptied." "The syndicate will have to wait in line," Maya said, pulling a pair of heavy zip ties from her pocket. "Because I just forwarded your personal ledger, complete with your unredacted signature on Vance's VX nerve gas orders, to the director of MI6. They will be here in exactly 4 minutes." Croft let out a pathetic, choked sob, his trembling fingers hovering over the tablet. He looked at the shadows in the room, then back at the relentless, terrifying woman standing before him. He typed in his authorization codes. "Funds transferred. Accounts zeroed." Maya checked the screen, nodded, and grabbed Croft by his collar, hauling him out of his chair. She zip-tied his hands tightly around the heavy iron leg of his desk. In the distance, the The wail of police sirens began to rise above the sound of the London storm. Maya turned and walked toward the broken balcony door. "You can't do this," Croft yelled, struggling against the plastic cuffs. "You're not the law. You're nothing but a monster." Maya paused at the threshold, the freezing rain washing over her face. She looked back at the ruined billionaire. "I'm not a monster, Julian," she said softly, the faint echo of Elias Thorne's legacy ringing in her words. "I'm the consequence." She stepped off the balcony, the grapple line humming into the darkness, disappearing into the storm long before the first police helicopter bathed the penthouse in its searchlight. The hunt had only just begun. The Mediterranean Sea, 3 miles off the coast of Monaco. The superyacht Leviathan did not just float, it dominated the water. At 300 feet of sleek, midnight blue steel and tinted glass, it looked less like a pleasure cruiser and more like a floating fortress. The neon glow of Monte Carlo sparkled in the distance like a handful of crushed diamonds scattered across the black velvet of the coastline. But out here, in international waters, the yacht was a law unto itself. On the lowest deck, just above the waterline, the heavy thrum of the vessel's twin diesel engines masked a much softer sound. A wet, synthetic slap against the titanium hull. Maya Hayes pulled herself out of the freezing, ink-black water, her magnetic climbing gloves gripping the slick metal of the yacht with terrifying strength. She wore a specialized, thermal-regulated wetsuit that absorbed radar frequencies. Water sheeted off her as she deactivated her rebreather, her lungs expanding silently in the salty Mediterranean air. Billionaires build walls to keep the world out. Maya, mercenaries build walls to keep their enemies out. Know the difference before you knock. Elias's teachings were no longer just memories, they were the operating system of her mind. The man who owned the Leviathan was both a billionaire and a mercenary. Anton Varga, former Spetsnaz commander, current black market shipping magnate. While Julian Croft had managed the money for Project Chimera, Varga was the man who actually moved the VX nerve gas across global borders. The files leaked from Langley showed that Vance had transferred 3 crates of weaponized biological agents to Varga's control just hours before his death. 2 crates had been recovered by Interpol. The third was still missing. Varga was the only one who knew where it was. Maya scaled the hull, her movements smooth and arachnid-like, bypassing the external thermal sensors Elias had taught her to spot years ago. She reached the aft deck. 2 armed guards in expensive tailored suits were patrolling the teakwood planks, carrying suppressed Chris Vector submachine guns. Varga wasn't taking any chances since the Langley leak. Maya didn't climb over the railing. She waited, hanging suspended over the churning wake of the yacht. The first guard walked past her position, the glowing tip of his cigar illuminating his face. Maya reached up, her hand locking around his ankle like a vice. Before the man could draw a breath to scream, she yanked him backward over the railing. He plummeted into the roaring propellers below with a muffled splash, the dark water instantly swallowing him whole. The second guard stopped, frowning at the sudden absence of his partner. "Yuri?" he called out in Russian. Maya vaulted over the railing, a dripping, black silhouette. The guard spun, raising his Vector, but she was already inside his guard. She drove the heel of her palm upward, shattering his nose, and simultaneously swept his legs out from under him. As he fell, she caught the back of his neck, driving him face first into the solid teak deck. He was unconscious before the blood started to pool. She dragged his body behind a stack of luxury deck chairs and drew her customized, integrally suppressed pistol. The Leviathan had 4 decks. Varga would be in the master stateroom on the 3rd level, wrapped in steel-reinforced bulkheads. Maya moved through the yacht's lower corridors like a phantom, avoiding the grand staircases and utilizing the narrow crew maintenance shafts. The contrast was jarring. Above her, she could hear the faint, muffled thumping of heavy bass from the upper deck where Varga's guests were partying, oblivious to the predator hunting below their feet. She reached the 3rd deck. The corridor leading to the master stateroom was empty, save for a single, heavy steel door. Maya didn't bother picking the lock. Varga was Spetsnaz, he would have pressure plates inside the threshold. Instead, she retrieved a small-shaped charge of C4 from her waterproof harness. molded it specifically around the heavy electronic deadbolt, and stepped back. Thud. The directional explosion was incredibly quiet, designed to destroy the mechanism without triggering a massive shockwave. Maya kicked the door open and rolled into the room, her pistol sweeping the corners. The stateroom was cavernous, lined with mahogany and filled with the scent of expensive vodka and gun oil. But it was empty. The massive king-sized bed was unmade. "You're fast, Ghost," a thick, heavily accented voice boomed from the shadows near the walk-in closet. "But you are not invisible." Anton Varga stepped into the light. He was a mountain of a man, easily 6'4", with a brutally scarred face and eyes as cold as a Siberian winter. He wasn't holding a gun. He was holding a heavy, military-grade combat machete. "The third crate, Anton," Maya said, her gun leveled squarely at his broad chest. "Where is the VX gas?" Varga let out a low, rumbling laugh. "Vance warned me about you before you put a bullet in his head. He said you were a rabid dog off her leash. But look at you, coming onto my ship, making demands. You think you are the hunter here?" "I don't think," Maya said, her voice deadpan. "I know." Varga didn't hesitate. He lunged with terrifying speed for a man his size, swinging the machete in a deadly, horizontal arc aimed at her neck. Maya fired twice. The bullet struck Varga dead center in his chest, tearing through his silk shirt. But there was no blood. Kevlar plating. He's wearing heavy armor under the silk. Varga barely flinched from the impact. Continuing his swing, Maya dropped to her knees, the heavy blade slicing the air just millimeters above her head, severing a crystal lamp on the bedside table. She rolled away, holstering her useless pistol. If she couldn't shoot through his armor, she had to dismantle the man inside it. Size is an illusion. Every machine has joints. Break the joints. You break the machine. Varga charged again, bringing the machete down in an overhead strike meant to cleave her in two. Maya stepped into the attack rather than away from it, jamming her forearm hard against the inside of his wrist to stop the blade's momentum. The impact sent a shockwave of pain up her arm, but she ignored it. She pivoted, driving her knee brutally into the side of Varga's knee joint. He grunted, his massive leg buckling slightly. Maya used the opening to deliver a rapid succession of elbow strikes to his exposed throat and jaw. Varga roared in anger, dropping the machete and grabbing Maya by her tactical vest. With terrifying strength, he lifted her entirely off the ground and threw her across the room. She crashed into a heavy glass coffee table, shattering it into 1,000 pieces. Maya gasped, the wind knocked out of her. She looked up just as Varga drew a massive Desert Eagle hand cannon from an ankle holster. "End of the line, little ghost," he sneered, pulling the hammer back. Maya's eyes darted to the severed electrical wire from the crystal lamp Varga had chopped earlier. The exposed copper was resting in a puddle of spilled vodka on the floor, right near Varga's heavy leather boots. She didn't try to get up. She reached out, grabbed a solid piece of broken glass from the table, and threw it with pinpoint accuracy. The glass didn't hit Varga. It hit the wall switch that controlled the room's main power grid. The switch flipped. Electricity surged through the severed wire. The puddle of vodka ignited instantly. But worse, the raw current arched directly into the wet leather of Varga's boots. Varga's body seized violently. The Desert Eagle discharged into the ceiling as 220 volts of ungrounded Mediterranean yacht power locked every muscle in his massive frame. He thrashed, his eyes wide with agony, before collapsing onto the mahogany floor like a felled oak tree, smoke curling from his shoes. Maya slowly pushed herself up from the broken glass. Her ribs screamed in protest, but her face remained impassive. She walked over to the twitching, paralyzed giant. She kicked the Desert Eagle away and knelt beside him, pulling a specialized data extraction cable from her belt. "You should have stuck to the shadows, Anton," Maya whispered. She found his encrypted satellite phone in his pocket, jammed the cable in, and connected it to her wrist-mounted terminal. Within 30 seconds, she had bypassed his security protocols, downloading the complete GPS tracking history of his shipping fleet. There it was, a cargo freighter, the Borealis, currently halfway across the Atlantic Ocean, headed for a port in South America. The manifest listed medical supplies. But the encrypted sublayer identified the cargo as Chimera-class VX. She had her next target. Suddenly, the blaring shriek of the yacht's general alarm tore through the air. The bodies on the aft deck had been discovered. Heavy footsteps pounded down the hallway outside. Maya looked down at Varga. He was recovering, his breathing ragged, trying to reach for his dropped machete. She stomped her boot down hard on his wrist, breaking it with a sickening crunch. She didn't kill him, she left him alive. A broken message for the rest of the syndicate. The ghost is coming. Maya sprinted toward the massive, bulletproof window overlooking the sea. She drew her grapple gun, fired a solid steel bolt directly into the glass to shatter the structural integrity, and then hit the compromised pane with her shoulder. The glass exploded outward. Maya Hayes dove into the rushing night air, plummeting 70 feet down toward the black water of the Mediterranean. She hit the surface cleanly, instantly swallowed by the depths, leaving the blaring alarms and the burning stateroom far behind. She had the location of the gas. The clock was ticking, and the ocean was calling. The mid-Atlantic Ocean, latitude 24 degrees north, longitude 45 degrees west. The Atlantic didn't care about billionaires, mercenaries, or ghosts. Out here, nature was the only true apex predator. A massive squall was tearing across the open water, whipping the ocean into 50-foot swells that crashed like liquid mountains against the rusted, groaning hull of the Borealis. The cargo freighter was a colossal beast of burden, carrying thousands of shipping containers stacked like jagged steel building blocks into the black sky, and clinging to the port side anchor chain, battered by the freezing spray, was Maya Hayes. She had intercepted the ship's path via a halo jump, high altitude, low opening, from a chartered black market transport plane 2 hours ago, dropping into the freezing ocean miles ahead of the vessel and letting the massive ship literally sail right into her path. When you fight in a burning house, Maya, you don't fight the fire. You let the fire fight your enemy. Elias's ghost whispered through the howling wind. Tonight, the storm was her fire. Maya timed her movements with the violent pitch and yaw of the massive ship. She hauled herself over the railing, her stealth suit dripping with seawater, blending perfectly into the shadows of the lower deck. The air was thick with the suffocating smell of diesel fumes, rust, and salt. She tapped her wrist-mounted terminal. The GPS data from Varga's yacht had given her the ship, but not the exact container. There were over 3,000 steel boxes on board. Finding the Chimera-class VX nerve gas was like finding a needle in a floating, heavily armed haystack. But Maya had an advantage. The syndicate was terrified. Varga had survived long enough to send a warning. The crew of the Borealis wasn't just navigating a storm, they were preparing for a siege. Maya slipped between a narrow corridor of towering red and blue shipping containers. The deck was slick with rain and seafoam. Ahead of her, 2 mercenaries in heavy yellow rain slickers were patrolling the catwalk, their assault rifles slung tight across their chests. Visibility is 0. Man, one of them shouted over the roar of the ocean, wiping saltwater from his tactical goggles. If this ghost is out there, she's already drowned. Varga said she's not human. The other replied, his voice tight with genuine fear. Keep your eyes on the thermal scanners. Boss wants the package prepped for deep water jettison. If she boards us, we sink the gas and scrub the evidence. Maya's eyes narrowed in the dark. Jettison. If they dumped the crates into the ocean with explosive scuttling charges, the pressure would rupture the containment units. The VX gas would contaminate the Gulf Stream, causing an ecological and human catastrophe of unimaginable scale. She couldn't just kill them, she had to secure the payload. Maya waited until the ship violently rolled to the starboard side. The sudden shift in gravity threw the mercenaries off balance, making them grab the handrails. It was a 2-second window. It was all she needed. Maya launched herself from the shadows. She closed the gap silently, her combat knife drawn. She didn't stab, she used the heavy pommel of the blade, bringing it down in a brutal arc against the base of the first guard's skull. He crumpled instantly, the storm swallowing the sound of his fall. The second guard spun around, raising his rifle, but the rolling deck betrayed his footing. Maya stepped inside his reach, grabbed the barrel of his weapon, and violently twisted it upward. With her free hand, she delivered a palm strike to his throat, followed by a sweeping kick that sent him crashing hard against the corrugated steel of a container. He slid to the deck, unconscious. Maya quickly searched them, finding a handheld radio and a manifest scanner. She looked at the scanner's screen. It was locked onto a tracking beacon pulsing near the ship's bow. Container Bay 4, Tier 2. She moved with relentless precision, navigating the labyrinth of steel corridors. The storm was worsening, lightning tearing across the sky, illuminating the borealis in blinding, jagged flashes of white light. She reached Bay 4. It was a clearing on the forward deck, surrounded by towering walls of containers. In the center sat a single, unmarked black shipping container, and standing around it was a heavily armed death squad. There were 6 of them, dressed in full tactical gear, anchoring heavy steel cables to the corners of the container. A massive loading crane hummed above them, its giant hook descending through the rain. They were getting ready to lift the VX gas and drop it straight into the Atlantic. Standing near the container doors was the squad leader, holding a detonator wired to a block of C4 plastered directly onto the container's locking mechanism. "Hook it up," the leader roared into his radio. "We dump it now." Maya had no cover, no backup, and no time for stealth. If that container went over the side, thousands of innocents along the coastline would die. She drew her suppressed Sig Sauer and her customized MP7 submachine gun simultaneously. Akimbo. It was reckless. It was loud. It was exactly what Elias would have told her never to do unless the variables demanded absolute chaos. Maya stepped out into the pouring rain. She didn't shout. She just pulled the triggers. The suppressed weapon spit a lethal crossfire of 9mm and 4.6mm rounds. The 2 men rigging the cables dropped instantly, their armor failing against the armor-piercing ammunition. "Contact, port side," the leader screamed, diving behind the black container. The remaining mercenaries returned fire. The air filled with the deafening chatter of automatic weapons, bullets sparking and ricocheting wildly off the steel walls around Maya. She didn't stop moving. She used the ship's violent pitching to her advantage, sliding across the wet deck, firing with terrifying, algorithmic accuracy. A mercenary tried to flank her from the right. Maya dropped to one knee, tracking his movement through the rain, and fired a double tap into his center mass. 3 down. But the squad leader wasn't shooting at her. He was looking at the C4 strapped to the doors. "If we can't sink it, we blow it right here," he yelled, his thumb hovering over the detonator. "You want the gas, Ghost? Breathe deep." "No," Maya shouted, sprinting directly into the open crossfire. She threw her empty MP7 like a projectile, hitting one of the remaining shooters in the faceplate, and dove sliding across the slick deck toward the leader. The leader pressed the detonator. Maya fired her Sig Sauer. The bullet shattered the mercenary's wrist a fraction of a millisecond before the signal could be sent. He screamed, dropping the remote. Maya tackled him, sending them both crashing into the heavy steel doors of the black container. The ship rolled violently again, and the massive crane hook swinging wildly above them smashed into a nearby stack of boxes, raining sparks and rusted shrapnel down on the deck. The leader drew a combat knife with his good hand, driving it toward Maya's ribs. She blocked it with her forearm, ignoring the burning slice of the blade, and drove her forehead brutally into his nose. As he reeled back, she disarmed him and pinned him to the deck, her gun pressed to his temple. The last remaining mercenary, seeing his squad decimated, dropped his weapon and ran blindly into the maze of containers. Maya didn't chase him. She gasped for air, her chest heaving, the rain washing the blood from her cheek. She looked at the terrified squad leader pinned beneath her. "The detonator," Maya demanded, her voice cutting through the thunder. "How is it wired?" "It's a dead man's switch on the inside." The man choked out, coughing up salt water and blood. "We wired the interior crates. Even if you open the doors, the pressure seal breaks and starts a 3-minute timer. You're already dead." Maya's eyes widened. She knocked him out with the butt of her gun and scrambled up to the container doors. She carefully peeled the C4 off the locking bar and tossed it over the railing into the ocean. Taking a deep breath, She grabbed the heavy steel handle and pulled the doors open. Inside, illuminated by the red emergency lights of the container, sat 3 military-grade stasis pods containing the VX gas canisters. And strapped to the center pod was a digital explosive charge. As the doors opened and the pressure normalized, the screen blinked to life with a shrill, electronic chirp. 259, 258, 257. Maya stared at the ticking red numbers. The roar of the Atlantic storm suddenly feeling very far away. She was locked in a steel box with enough nerve gas to wipe out a city. A bomb she didn't know how to defuse. And less than 3 minutes to live. For the first time since Elias died, Maya Hayes truly felt the chill of the grave. 257, 256, 255. The red LED numbers glared in the dim, claustrophobic belly of the shipping container. Outside, the Atlantic Ocean threw another massive swell against the hull of the Borealis, sending a violent shudder through the steel walls. Maya Hayes didn't look at the clock. Staring at the time was how you died. The clock is a psychological weapon. Maya, it's designed to make your hands shake. Elias's voice echoed, crisp and clinical, a memory from a bomb disposal course at Camp Perry. Ignore the numbers. Focus on the circuit. A bomb doesn't know how much time it has left. It only knows when the loop is broken. She dropped to her knees, her soaked tactical suit heavy with seawater, and pulled a specialized titanium multi-tool from her vest. She assessed the device. It was a nightmare. The bomb wasn't just strapped to the center stasis pod. It was hardwired into the pressure seals of all 3 VX nerve gas canisters. Thick blocks of military-grade C4 explosive were packed tightly around the structural seams. If it detonated, it wouldn't just destroy the container, it would vaporize the VX compound, aerosolizing it instantly into the storm. 214, 213. Maya clicked on a small, high-intensity penlight, gripping it between her teeth. She traced the primary wiring bundle leading from the digital timer to the detonator caps. Her breath hitched. Spliced into the main bundle was a small, glass cylinder half filled with a silver liquid. A mercury tilt switch. "You got to be kidding me," she muttered around the flashlight. A mercury switch detonates the bomb if it's tilted past a certain angle. On solid ground, it was a standard anti-tamper measure. But out here, on a cargo ship pitching violently in 50-foot swells, it was a miracle the bomb hadn't already gone off. Suddenly, the deck dropped sharply as the ship slid down the trough of a massive wave. Maya was thrown sideways, her shoulders slamming hard into the corrugated steel wall. The mercury in the glass tube sloshed wildly, rushing toward the metal contact points at the end of the cylinder. Maya scrambled forward, jamming her hands flat against the explosive housing to brace it, using her own body weight to counter the pitch of the ship. The mercury stopped a millimeter away from the contacts as the ship temporarily leveled out. 145, 144. She couldn't just cut the power. There was a secondary battery backup, a collapsed circuit that would trigger the detonators the moment the primary line was severed. She had to bridge the connection, tricking the bomb into thinking the loop was still closed, before she could disable the mercury switch. Her fingers were freezing, numb from the Atlantic storm, but they moved with the delicate, surgical precision of a watchmaker. She stripped the rubber casing off a piece of copper bypass wire from her kit. 110, 109. "Okay, Elias," she whispered, a bead of sweat mixing with the freezing rain on her forehead. "Green to green, or blue to yellow?" The wiring was completely customized, specifically designed to confuse EOD specialists. There were no standard color codes. Maya closed her eyes for exactly 2 seconds. She mapped the circuit board in her mind, tracing the paths from the battery to the capacitor. Ignoring the decoy wires, the red wire led to the backup battery. The yellow wire was a dummy loop. The blue wire fed the detonator cap. She opened her eyes. With her left hand, she carefully attached one end of the copper bypass to the base of the blue wire. Her right hand, holding the wire cutters, moved toward the top of the circuit. 045, 044. Another massive wave slammed into the Borealis. The entire container groaned in protest, tilting violently to the starboard side. Maya wedged her combat boot under the heavy stasis pod, locking her knee, and pressed her shoulder tight against the explosive block. The ship rolled. The Mercury rushed toward the contacts again. Hold. Hold. She gritted her teeth, her muscles burning as she fought the physics of the ocean. The ship hit the crest of the wave and stabilized for a brief, agonizing moment. The Mercury settled. 020. 019. Maya didn't hesitate. She clamped the other end of the bypass wire onto the circuit, establishing a fake bridge. Then, she squeezed the grips of her wire cutters, slicing cleanly through the primary blue wire. 011. 010. Nothing happened. No explosion. The bypass held. The detonator was isolated from the timer. But the timer was still running. And the Mercury switch was still alive. If the Mercury touched the contacts, the backup circuit would still fire. 008. 007. Maya grabbed a canister of liquid nitrogen freezing spray from her tactical pouch, a standard tool for neutralizing thermal sensors. She aimed the nozzle directly at the small glass cylinder. 005. 004. She pressed the valve. A blast of supercooled vapor coated the Mercury switch, freezing the liquid metal instantly into a solid, immobile mass. 003. 002. She drove the tip of her combat knife under the digital timer module and ripped it violently from the explosive block, severing the final connection. The red LED numbers flickered, glitched, and went completely dark. Silence filled the container, broken only by the muffled roar of the ocean outside. Maya slumped back against the freezing steel floor, dropping the multi-tool. Her chest heaved as she dragged in deep, ragged breaths of the chemical-tinged air. For a long moment, she just sat there in the dark, letting her adrenaline crash. She had won. The gas was secured. She pushed herself up, her legs shaking slightly, and keyed the radio she had taken from the Mercenary outside. She tuned it to the ship's internal bridge frequency. "Bridge, this is the Ghost," Maya broadcasted, her voice icy and commanding. Static hissed over the channel before a terrified, accented voice responded. What do you want? Who are you? Your mercenary detail is neutralized. The explosives are disabled. The payload is under my control. Maya stated. You are going to alter your heading. You are steering this vessel to the naval port at Gibraltar. If you deviate from that course by a single degree, I will come up to the bridge and throw you into the Atlantic. Do you understand? Why, yes. Gibraltar. Altering course now, the captain stammered. Maya crushed the radio beneath her heel. She knew MI6 and Europol had listening posts monitoring this frequency. They would be waiting at the docks with an army to secure the VX gas and arrest the crew. Her job here was done. She pushed the heavy container doors open, stepping back out into the raging storm. The wind whipped her dark hair violently around her face. She looked out over the black, churning expanse of the ocean. Julian Croft was broken. Anton Varga was crippled. The VX gas was secured. But Maya knew the truth. They were just the arms and legs of the syndicate. They were the bankers and the smugglers. To truly end this, she had to cut off the head. She had to find the architect, the phantom who had originally brokered the deal with Director Vance. She reached into her vest and pulled out a small, encrypted drive she had taken from Varga's satellite phone in Monaco. It contained one final set of coordinates. A name. The architect. Maya walked to the edge of the ship, the freezing sea spray washing over her. She pulled a flare from her belt, cracked it, and held it high above her head. The brilliant red magnesium light cut through the storm, a beacon for the extraction plane circling miles above. The battle for the Borealis was over, but the war for the shadows was reaching its final, terrifying climax. Maya dropped the flare onto the deck and stepped off the railing into the roaring dark. Rome, Italy. The catacombs beneath the Basilica of San Clemente. Rome didn't hide its history, it buried it. Deep beneath the bustling tourist streets and magnificent churches lay a labyrinth of ancient catacombs, cold and forgotten by time. But to the architect, the darkness wasn't a place to be forgotten. It was a place to rule. The architect didn't have a real name on any global database. He was a digital phantom. The man who had connected Director Vance's greed with Anton Varga's shipping network and Julian Croft's vault. He was the brain behind Project Chimera. Maya Hayes moved through a first-century stone tunnel, her footsteps completely silent on the damp earth. She wore a matte black tactical suit, equipped with a suppressed Sig Sauer and a short combat wakizashi. The only light came from her night vision goggles, painting the space in an eerie, ghostly green. A man who fights with his mind will always build a fortress out of illusions. Maya, don't trust what you see, trust what you can calculate. Elias's teachings echoed once more. Ahead, the ancient stone tunnel gave way to a modern titanium steel door, heavily fortified with biometric sensors and cloaked cameras. The intersection of the past and future tech. Maya didn't try to hack it. The architect had undoubtedly set digital traps. Instead, she drew a tube of military-grade corrosive thermite paste, carefully applying it along the steel hinges of the door. A soft sizzling echoed as the acid ate through the thick metal. It took exactly 60 seconds. The heavy door lost its anchor. Maya gave it a gentle push, and it collapsed inward, falling onto a sound-absorbing mat. She stepped inside. The architect's sanctuary was unlike any bunker she had ever seen. It was a massive vaulted room, bathed in soft yellow light. Renaissance paintings hung on the ancient stone walls, while the center of the room was dominated by a humming cluster of supercomputer servers. Sitting in the middle of the room on a vintage leather chair was an older man with silver-white hair, wearing a bespoke three-piece suit. He was leisurely pouring a glass of red wine. I wondered how long it would take you to find your way here. Maya, the architect spoke. His tone was rich, carrying a heavy European aristocratic accent, completely devoid of fear. 2 weeks since the incident on the Borealis. You work slower than I thought. Maya aimed her Sig Sauer dead center at his forehead. The game is over. Your system has collapsed. The men who served you have paid the price. The man chuckled softly, taking a sip of his wine. System collapsed? My dear girl, you've chopped off a few tentacles, but you haven't even touched the heart of the monster. Project Chimera was just a minor experiment. This world is run by chaos, and I am the man who sells umbrellas when the storm hits. He set the glass down, his eyes turning razor sharp. Did you think Elias Thorne was a saint? Did you think he was completely innocent in all this? Maya's grip on her gun tightened slightly. You're trying to manipulate me. I'm telling you the truth. The architect pressed a button on his desk. A massive holographic screen materialized in the center of the room, displaying classified documents bearing Elias's signature from 5 years ago. Elias knew about the biological weapons deals long before Vienna. He let it happen to gather enough evidence to tear down the entire intelligence apparatus, rather than just busting a few individuals. Your teammates in Vienna. They were pawns Elias willingly sacrificed to see the whole board. Maya's world seemed to stop spinning. The architect's words stabbed into her mind like poisoned blades. Elias knew? Vance pulled the trigger, but Elias was the one who let them walk into the trap. The architect continued, taking a step forward, his voice hypnotic. Don't fight for hypocrites. Maya, come work for me. I can offer you what JSOC and Elias never could. Absolute power to reshape the world. Maya stared at the screen, then back at the architect. The internal conflict was evident in her eyes. His weapon wasn't bullets, it was doubt. He wanted to destroy her ideology from the inside out. But the architect had underestimated the monster Elias had created. Maya's eyes suddenly turned as cold and still as a frozen lake. You forgot one variable, Maya said softly, her voice flat and devoid of emotion. Which variable? He raised an eyebrow. You thought I cared whether Elias was a saint or a devil. Maya took a step forward, her gun unwavering. I'm not here to protect his legacy. I'm here to make sure that men like you can never use people like us as pawns again. The architect frowned, taking a step back, his hand reaching for a panic button hidden under the desk. Bang! Maya didn't hesitate. She pulled the trigger. The 9mm round punched straight through the back of the architect's hand, pinning it to the solid oak desk. He screamed in agony, dropping to his knees, his arrogance completely shattered. Maya stepped forward, pulling a data cloning drive from her pocket and jamming it directly into his master server. She typed on the keyboard with one hand, the other keeping her gun trained on his head, backing up the entire black ledger. the client lists, and the network source code. Maya declared, everything is being routed directly to thousands of anonymous servers across the globe. An open-source hunt for anyone who wants to track down the rest of your syndicate. You're insane, the architect snarled, blood dripping onto the floor. You'll burn down the entire power structure of the world. It's time the world learned to rebuild itself from the ashes, Maya said, hitting the enter key. The screen flashed green, confirming the data transfer was complete. Maya yanked the drive out, then tossed an incendiary thermite grenade into the center of the server cluster. The ghost game is over, she said, turning her back and walking toward the door. A brilliant white fire erupted, vaporizing the supercomputer and all the original data in a fraction of a second. This time, Maya didn't kill her target. She left him alive, because an architect stripped of his money, his data, and his anonymity suffers a fate far worse than death. From now on, his own former clients would be the ones hunting him. Maya Hayes stepped out of the catacombs, returning to the crisp night air of Rome. Her personal war had ended, but a new, global purge had just begun, and she would be the one watching it all unfold from the shadows.